Welcome back to the Hard Skills Show, where we take a deep dive into the most challenging soft skills required to navigate leadership uncertainty, complexities, and change today and into the future. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu. I'm a psychologist, leadership consultant, and founder of TowerScope. And I'm so excited for today's episode on healing from moral injury with Dr. Jenny Byrne, not just because she really enjoyed the beginning music, but also because I feel like it's especially relevant given the stressful national events we're all grappling with right now and their impact on how organizations are going about supporting or not supporting their employees through this. And it's also a great topic to help us kick off season 7, focused on navigating unhealthy work environments in honor of my new book, Millennials Workbook for Navigating Workplace Politics. So, whether you're a leader managing a team or simply trying to support your colleagues, this conversation is for you. Let me introduce our extraordinary guest today, Dr. Jenny Byrne. She is an advisor for healthcare innovators to help shape the future of healthcare. She is co-founder of Belong Health, a healthcare company that serves vulnerable populations. She has a dual background as an MD PhD in neuroscience and a board-certified psychiatrist. She's an entrepreneur who previously founded, grew, and exited a clinical organization and served in a C-suite executive at a national level. She is a speaker and best-selling author of Work Smart, a book on how to use brain and behavior science to work smarter. And her second book, Moral Injury, Healing the Healers, focuses on the clinician crisis facing the American healthcare system today. And that's what we're talking about today. So finally, also, as a practicing psychiatrist, she focuses on caring for other physicians with mental health needs, including depression, anxiety, ADHD, burnout, and moral injury. So she's kind of like a jack of all trades, expert in many. Welcome and great to have you on the show, Jenny.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with all of your many interests and areas of expertise, why moral injury? How did you end up in this particular topic area of interest?
That's a great question. So, as with many things in life, it was not a linear path saying I'm going to publish this book, and it wasn't actually a goal of mine to publish a second book in a year. It's actually fairly ambitious. I wasn't planning that. But the reason I felt compelled to write it and publish it, and I did it in 4 months, which, as you know from being an
Wow.
author, is like very fast.
Yes.
Um, I felt really compelled to put this out into the world because my work, I have a very interesting seat. I get to see a lot of different pieces of the puzzle in healthcare, all the way from C-suite down into the field work, thinking about finance and tech and all these things. And what was really standing out to me in kind of late 2023 was the fact that behind closed doors, everybody was saying the same thing
Mm.
and nobody was saying it to each other. And what they were saying to me, and I guess because I'm a shrink, people just tell me things.
Yeah.
But they would say, Jenny, and they'd, before the Zoom call started or whatever, they'd say, you know, I don't know, things just don't feel right at work. Like, as soon as I can get enough money to pay for my kids to go to college, like, I'm out of here.
Mm.
Or I'm
Hmm.
thinking of downsizing my house so that I don't have to do this anymore. And these are people who are very passionate about what they do. Some have spent decades of education. Some of these C-suite leaders, you look at them and, they seem like they have everything anybody could ever want. And they were all struggling with some of the same bad feelings. And so I got really curious about it. And I was like, what's going on here? And people would say it was burnout. And I was like, I don't know. That just doesn't feel right to me. It seems like something else is going. So I started researching. I started talking to a lot of colleagues. And one of my interviews led me to Dr. Warren Kinghorn, who is native to Durham, North Carolina, which is right down the road from us.
Yeah.
And he is a really interesting person that has a combination of background in divinity training, military, he works at the VA, and psychiatry. And he introduced me to the idea of moral injury. So it comes from the military. And when I heard that and started listening to him and reading, I was like, that's really something important. Like, this really captures what I think is going on. And so that's kind of how I went down the path. And then I did a bunch of interviews, which, again, when you write a book, sometimes the interviews take you off in new directions, which is one of the fun parts. And so I learned a ton, did a lot of research, got a lot of stories and really very vulnerable stories from the people I interviewed. So this book felt a little bit different than the first one.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about definitions because, some people who might be listening at a very surface level would say, oh, that just describes stress, or like you said, that just describes burnout, right? But you've done a good job of teasing that apart in your book. And and it is true that moral injury, that sort of topic area, really did start emerge much more out of the military experience, where um, you know it's the experience of a, for example, combat soldier um, doing things that were required of them, but then realizing later it was against their personal morals, and all of a sudden it was kind of a moral dilemma, like, what did I do? Who am I? What does this mean? Does God exist? Like an existential kind of crisis, right? And so let's tease apart um, some things that I think um, there are some overlaps between, but there's some clear, like, it feels different. And some of these are diagnoses and some of these are not, right? They don't, right? So that's, I think, important. So the things that come up immediately are, we talk about burnout, we talk about just stress, right? Um, the moral injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, there's some overlaps there. Um, compassion fatigue, right? That's been talked about kind of a while ago. And that comes more out of the nursing industry, right? And experiences. And organizational and institutional trauma, right? There's some overlaps there. Not all of these are mental health conditions, though, right? So I would love to hear, like, your thoughts about how do you tease them apart when you're talking, and when you hear these stories, how do you think, oh, that's much more like this, or that's more like this one?
Yeah, great question. So I'm a very visual person. So if you could imagine if we were standing together, I'd have a whiteboard right now, but if you can imagine a Venn diagram, so kind of like three circles that are overlapping. So three of those terms, I think it's helpful to imagine as a Venn. So burnout, moral injury, and PTSD or trauma. I think that's really helpful with, especially for the healthcare experience. So the reason it matters, why what we call things,
Mm-hmm.
is because the pragmatic way to heal or fix things comes from knowing what they are. And these three things have very different healing mechanisms or ways to fix it. So if you're calling something by the wrong name, you might waste a whole bunch of time and money trying to heal or fix it when you're like gone down the wrong path, basically. So that's why it matters. Um, so burnout, let's take the first one. The circle of burnout, I would describe burnout, and there's different definitions now because it's so commonly used. I would define it as a state of energy depletion. And that could be physiological exhaustion, mental exhaustion. It's just exhaustion. So in the past, people have talked about fixing burnout by not being exhausted anymore, taking vacation, doing yoga, taking care of yourself, taking a sabbatical, whatever. Those were the ways that you improve exhaustion. And that is true. If the underlying cause is exhaustion and you rest, you can come back. Then you have moral injury. Moral injury, like you mentioned, I use the definition from the military, which is a threefold definition that you do something, witness something, part of something, or unable to stop something that goes against your values. And those can be personal values, religious values, professional values, community values, whatever they are. The second thing is that somebody superior to you either orders it or condones it. And then the final third thing is that the stakes are high. So obviously in the military, stakes are often high. But in healthcare, if you're a clinician, stakes feel high. Everything you do feels like it could be almost a life or death issue. Every click of your mouse feels high stakes. So that's kind of the moral injury. And I would say the way I like to think about it is it's more of a wound that needs to be healed. It's not a light bulb that gets swapped out. Like a burnout implies an industrial light bulb kind of thing that you just get a new light bulb or recharge your battery. I don't think that works for moral injury. Moral injury is like a wound, and you could even say it's like a wound on your soul, which is kind of deep.
Yeah.
Um, so that's the second circle. And then you have the third, which is more of trauma. And, some people exposed to trauma develop PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Some people exposed to trauma do not. I would, in the healthcare setting, posit that the pandemic was a global trauma for healthcare.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't have other traumas going on in your life, which many people did, but even if you didn't, as a healthcare clinician, it was a trauma. And even as an executive, that was a trauma. So then you think about the Venn diagram and you try to figure out when you hear a story, okay, where is the story falling? Is it more clearly in the burnout camp? Is it in the intersection of burnout, moral injury, or is it smack in the middle where you really have all three happening at the same time? So that's how those three terms to me intersect in a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
And then some of the other terms you mentioned are, I don't want to say, I don't want to confuse people, but they're basically normal. So, like, stress is normal. Your body is designed, if you geek out on the neuroscience and the physiology, we have a parasympathetic nervous system, we have a sympathetic nervous system. When the lion jumps out at you from the forest, you don't want to just be all calm and relaxed and chill and just sit there. No, you want your sympathetic nervous system to kick into overdrive so that you can either get the heck out or fight the lion, the fight or flight. So stress is neither good nor bad. It just is a normal human physiological event. However, it can be triggered in error. So when the lion jumps out at you, yeah, you better get going and get that sympathetic. But when you get an email from your boss, you probably don't need to have that reaction that you did for the lion, but you may feel the same as if a lion just jumped out at you. And I've received some emails like that myself. The compassion fatigue is also a normal human event. So our ability to be compassionate, which is a type of empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand or imagine what somebody else is going through. Compassion is a type of empathy where you're actually actively engaged in some emotional exchange, which compels you to take action. It is normal for humans to have a limited amount of that. If you're sick, you're going to have less. If you're having a great day and a big check just went in the bank and your kids are happy, you're going to have more. So it varies from day to day. And some people just inherently have more of a store of it than others. So, for example, for me to do psychotherapy with patients, I love it. I can't really do more than an hour or two a day. I'm pretty drained at that point. I can do medication titration all day long, but the psychotherapy drains me, where somebody else might be able to do it 10 hours a day and not get drained. So there's like different amounts per person. And then also it varies from day to day or time to time. So those are some of the terms I would think about, like normal and less normal. So there's a lot of things that are actually pretty normal to human brains and bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that's a good way to tease it apart. And actually, um, compassion fatigue, I see that as and I think there's been some research on this too, or literature around the connection between that and burnout. Like there are people who are susceptible to burnout as a result of compassion fatigue, and they might look about the same, and and then there's organizational trauma, which I would put under PTSD, right? Like you mentioned, you can have PTSD from, a single or several personal events, right, that have happened to you, but you could also have national level trauma and you could have organizational level trauma, all together in reaction to the things that have happened to you. The difference that I'm hearing that you've mentioned with all of these, and in terms of like teasing out moral injury, is that this piece about did it only happen to you or were you sucked into being part of it? And That is what I'm hearing as like a big um kind of like differentiating factor. Does that sound right?
I think that's a great way to describe it. Yes, that moral injury is something that you are either doing, you're part of, you can't stop it. And it's something that goes deeply against what you believe in, as opposed to like a toxic workplace where maybe it feels very external and it's just coming at you, right? But you're not really doing things that you feel like you're contributing to the toxic environment.
Yeah. Excellent. Super interesting. We are nearing an ad break. So when we come back from the ad break, we'll take that from like definition to what does it, look like? What do we do about it? Right. So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Jenny Byrne, author of Moral Injury, Healing the Healers. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. At that time, you can find us like right now live if you're listening. You can find us on LinkedIn or YouTube, several other locations at talkradio.nyc. Otherwise, we'll be right back with our guest in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Jenny Byrne. So we just got done sort of understanding what moral injury is as different from other sort of potentially overlapping experiences like burnout or PTSD. Now, your book, which I really enjoyed, by the way, goes beyond just talking about moral injury. It actually serves as kind of a commentary on our current healthcare system. So let's talk more about that. What do you see is creating or perpetuating the challenges that are leading to the experiences that you're seeing around moral injury?
Yeah, I think there's like no short answer to it, but I would say that through my interviews and my research, a couple themes have emerged about how this is happened, like why is this happening and why does it seem to not be improving? In fact, I would say it's kind of rapidly escalating
Wow.
amongst clinicians. Again, they say these things behind closed doors. But
Mm.
you may have noticed, I don't know, I mean, I'm a patient, most of us are a patient. You may have noticed doctors are turning over faster. Somebody retired and you're like, wait a minute, they're only like 50 and they just retired. That's a little bit weird. Or you may have
Yeah.
noticed some things in your own ecosystem.
Yeah, in fact,
Um,
we've noticed, just our doctors cutting their hours. Now I only work 3 days. Now I work, fewer hours. And we're like worried for our own doctors.
Yeah, and honestly, you should be. And part of the healing process I can talk about in a little bit is like what you as an everyday non-clinician can do to actually to make things better and to help heal, I can share that too. But here's, there's a couple trends of like why we've gotten to this place, and it feels like it happened all of a sudden. But if we really look back, the signs have been there for a while. So, first of all, the complexity of healthcare and medicine has exploded. And I like to tell the story of I have one doctor in my family was my maternal grandfather. He was a pediatrician in central Pennsylvania in post-World War II times. And when he died, I actually got all of his doctor gear and I have his little black bag. And if you look in his little black bag, the universe of treatment was in his bag. And he had little vials of chemicals, a little notepad of like recipes to make medicines, a syringe,
Wow.
and like back then, and that's a long time ago, but not that long ago, right? Like less than 100 years ago, the universe of medicine fit in his black bag. And he could go out into the countryside and see people in homes and take care of them with his little black bag. I mean, just think about that for a second. And now imagine if you have kids, your pediatric practice and all of the different pediatric specialties and the different medicines and the treatments and the screenings and the vaccines, which are, I know now, controversial. And just imagine the complexity of that. So the sheer complexity of healthcare and medicine has grown to the fact where like one human brain is actually not capable of understanding all of it. When I was in training in med school in the 90s, I had this feeling like if I just studied hard enough, maybe I could kind of know everything. Probably couldn't, but like I had the feeling like it was within my grasp. Now it is completely not within my grasp. I mean, it's literally not humanly possible. So that has happened, and that has happened worldwide. The second thing that has happened is the industrialization of medicine, which has followed the industrialization of other industries. So, my first book actually talked a little bit more about the Ford factory floor and how we evolved into our current corporate culture, right? Came from Ford. It didn't used to be like that before Ford. So medicine followed a little later. So medicine now feels like a factory floor. And if you talk to clinicians and interview them, pretty much every single person I interviewed said the same thing, which is, I don't want to feel like a cog in a machine. Healing is not a machine process. It is an organic process. They feel like they are on an assembly line. And if you're a patient like me and you go to the doctor and you're put in little rooms and little widgets come and do things to you, you feel like part of a machine too. I don't like that personally. Maybe some people do. So highly industrialized, which means operationalized. So medicine has become very operationalized. And when you lean on, there's nothing wrong with operations, but when you lean on operations, typically you're not thinking about emotional content or human experience. It's much more about operations. So that's the second thing that's happened. And then the third thing that has happened more recently, I'd say in the last 10 years, is the role of a clinician or a doctor in society has really changed. And part of that was the political climate of what happened. And then the pandemic happened and it really just got out of control. So, you used to have as a physician, like for me, when I went to training, I never thought I would be like the richest person in the world. I was like, yeah, I'll have enough money. I'll do okay, right? Like I'm not going to be broke. I'll be okay, but I will be respected. I will be a respected person. My family will respect me. My community will respect me. People will call me doctor. I will have respect and trust, and I will earn that trust. And I will work very hard, sometimes too hard to be that trusted person. So that actually has eroded and changed. And a lot of clinicians feel like they are no longer even they don't even get respected. And then in the worst case scenario, at the worst of the pandemic, they were actually being attacked and yelled at all day long for trying to save people. And you can imagine like what kind of like wound that leaves. So those are a couple of the trends of like why we're kind of where we're at today. And people assume it's just in the US, and that's actually not true at all. You can have socialized medicine, cash medicine, whatever you want. People are feeling the same way everywhere in the world. So it's actually not just the US. That's a bit of a myth.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. The other thing I remember from your book that I found really fascinating and it really stuck with me is how you sort of explained how many people you have to squeeze into an hour in order to make, like break even versus make some small profit. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about it, like how that fits into all of this.
Yeah, and I'm a pragmatist, so I'll just give you some examples. So, when I had my psychiatry practice, for example, psychiatrist is a specialist. We're not typically very paid great. I mean, we're paid better than primary care, but we're not typically, the bazillionaire. So, just as an example, so when I had my practice, a psychiatrist could expect to make between probably $100 to $200 an hour. So if I had a physician in my practice, I should expect to pay them $100 to $200 an hour, right? Not including all the fringe and all the other things they need or time off or just basic, 100 to 200 an hour. So insurance companies would contract with me and say, okay, Jenny, we will pay you every visit you do with a patient, you will get $70. Okay. So how many visits do I have to do per hour? $70 to pay that doctor. All my overhead, all my staff, all my everything. Okay, that's $140. The physician might want 200. No, that's not even a break even. Okay, 3, 210. It's probably still not break even when all my operational. Okay, maybe four visits. Now I'm up to 280. Okay, I'm getting closer to break even. So basically for that physician to be able to bring in enough revenue from insurance to pay for their salary, they probably need to do 5, 6, 7 appointments an hour.
Yeah,
So,
which is staggering. And most, most patients are unhappy not being, like able to spend time with their doctors. And most doctors are unhappy not being able to spend as much time with their patients. And for those of you out there who are thinking, wow, $100 to $200 an hour is a lot, just remember that doctors also come with like boatloads of loans that they had to go through,
so the average right now, just for some context, so the average time post undergrad that a physician will spend in training is a minimum of 7 years post undergraduate. So if you go straight through college, come out 21, you're basically 30 before you have any paid employment. Okay, so you have lost 10 years of wages, 10 years of 401ks, 10 years, and plus you're working your butt off. You're working like crazy, crazy hours. So first of all, I did not understand that when I started.
Yeah.
The second thing is debt. So most medical students are coming around $300,000 to $1 million in debt when they come out of school. So yes, 100 to 200 is good money. I'm not going to lie. But these are the most highly trained specialists in our country. I mean, the amount of money that goes into educating us and the amount of time we put in, the effort, I could go on and on about what it takes to come out on the other end of that. I mean, these are basically the highest trained specialists that you have across most disciplines in this country or internationally. So put it in a little context, I think. And it's also about expectations. When you are a med student, you don't expect to come out of school and be buried in debt until you're 50.
Right.
Like I just paid I'm very open about all of this. I just paid my my loans off last year at 51.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
So I have kids I had basically 6-month gap between my loans being paid off and a kid going into college.
Oh my God.
So again, I'm not saying that to say, oh, woe is me, but I'm just trying to give some context for why they feel this way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, all of that is adding, compounding the experience of medical, professionals, physicians, and healthcare within the healthcare system right now. We're reaching an ad break. When we come back, I'd love to sort of get into this other interesting idea that you had in your book around medical empathy.
Yeah.
And how that connects to moral injury. So you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Jenny Byrne, author of Moral Injury, Healing the Healers. And we will be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the hard skills. So we've been talking about moral injury. We've had, the definitions, some examples of how we get there. I want to touch very quickly on this interesting idea of medical empathy and how it connects. And then I want to move into kind of the kind of stages of moral injury and the healing process. The stages I find very interesting because you don't just like go from I don't have it, I have it. I thought that was really interesting. So, but before we get there, medical empathy, what is that and how does that connect?
Sorry. Empathy is a really fascinating topic. And one of the interesting things is that there is a biology underlying empathy. So I think this is the part you were referring to in the book. So healing between a clinician or another type of healer and a patient or a client or a person involves not only a competent type of assessment and treatment plan and so forth. There's actually a biological connection between human beings, which is healing. And if you think back again into history, that concept is not foreign at all. I mean, that's been the predominant model of healing over the era. Epics has been, human beings heal each other. And sometimes healing is not doing, it's being. Right? And psychotherapists, if there's anyone listening, know this very well.
Yeah.
Sometimes the role of medical empathy is to bear witness. And in the highly industrialized, operationalized world of medicine, I think that is what we feel is missing often, is the sense of human connection.
Yeah.
And if you want to geek out into the neuroscience, there's actually research that shows when human beings are in sync with one another, their brainwaves synchronize. And there was a study not that long ago, which I thought was great, about psychotherapists and their clients or patients. And they did EEG recordings. And when those two were synced up, meaning they were in good rapport, they were empathetic, they were really in the flow, their brainwaves synced up.
Which is where, hey, we're on the same wavelength probably comes from, right? And
right.
I don't want to throw us off track here, but because we talk a lot about team development on the show, right? And we talk about working in remote and hybrid environments. This is probably what is also leading to the degradation of teams and teaming, is that when you are, even if you're present with your team in the same amount of time, you're not receiving that human connection in that way, right?
I think yes and no. I mean, I think yes, we're missing the biological proximity and the electromagnetic waves, all sorts of stuff we don't know about. So we're missing out, definitely. But what's also interesting that is in a virtual space, you can also be in sync.
Oh, how interesting.
Yes. And a good example of that is storytelling. So when you look at storytellers, who are telling a story and you have a listener, the same parts of their brains will activate when you're really telling a good story. And that story could be told at the same time, synchronously, asynchronously. I'm a big reader. I'm a big book reader. I believe that I feel in sync with someone who wrote a book, hundreds of years ago when I read that book. So human connection isn't all an in-person phenomenon. And that's what to me is fascinating about the new ways of working. And for some people, again, people have different biologies. And for some people, the biology of being physically present is actually very hard on their body. Whereas other people thrive on that. And so there's a lot of like human physiology that differs from person to person. So one person might feel more in sync in person, and another person might feel more disconnected because they're actually physiologically not in sync, if that makes sense.
That is fascinating, Jenny. Absolutely fascinating. I might need to like have another episode just on this, but I'm going to get us back on track. Okay. So, let's talk about like the stages. You don't just go from 0 to 100 with moral injury. You in your book, you talked about, I think, 6 stages, 5 stages.
4. I like to think about it.
Okay.
Well, I wanted a good mental model. So I use the mental model of pressure wounds because we are taught in medical school and nursing school to stage a wound. So we're taught, okay, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4. So I like that mental model. And I think it, even if you're not a clinician, you can kind of understand, a level 1, stage 1 wound is like, oh, I banged into something, or I maybe lightly burned my skin and it's kind of red and irritated and surface is not broken. If I leave it alone and clean it, it'll probably be fine, right? That's like a stage 1. Stage 2 is like, oh no, I cut myself. It went past the surface. It's going to take a little while to heal that up. Maybe I need a Band-Aid. Maybe I need a little Neosporin. Maybe it'll heal on its own if I keep it it's like a little bit more. You might need some environmental supports, in other words, to let that heal up. Then you get into stage 3 pressure wound. Now things are getting kind of ugly. Now you're down into some tissue, maybe pussy. Things are just not probably going to heal on their own. You probably need some stitches. Maybe you have to have antibiotics. Like you need some external supports and treatments for that. A stage 4 pressure wound, if you've ever seen one and had the misfortune to see one, they're awful. You never forget one once you've seen them. They're all the way down. Sometimes bone is showing. They're putrid. They're not going to heal. It's really quite awful. And so the way I compare that to moral injury, I think the stage 1 is the like fatigue, light burnout, fatigue. Give it a break, come back fresh. You'll probably be okay as long as you're healthy and things are okay. Stage 2 is like, oh, I think I need some environmental support. So I think I need my boss to change, how the schedule works. I think I need a new assistant to help me here. I might need some technology. I need a little support to make this work. Then you get down into the ugly parts, which are the 3 and the 4. The 3 is really where you need this, and this is what I know you focus on, like the organization, the leadership needs to really step in. You're not going to heal on your own. The leadership needs to be involved. And then the stage 4 is unfortunately when they come to me as a psychiatrist, either externalizing it by being aggressive or destructive, or more commonly internalizing it and being self-destructive to the point where they may even be suicidal, using drugs. And that's when I get involved often as a psychiatrist, when things have gotten really, really bad.
Can you give me an example of like how these stages occur? Like, is it in the same environment? Is it dependent on environment? Is it sort of like a specific event? Like, how do you end up at different stages?
I would encourage people to think about like your human body. So like you can kind of intuitively understand that if you're young, you're 25, you're pretty healthy, you don't have any health conditions, you don't take any medicines, life is pretty good, you don't have any fun, everything's pretty good, and you get an injury, a burn, you're going to heal up, right? Like it's okay. But that same burn on a 95-year-old lady who is on 20 medications and immunocompromised, may have cancer, whose husband just died, who, like that same little burn may go all the way quickly to a stage 3 or 4 for that little old lady, whereas for that healthy 25-year-old, it may be no big deal. So the underlying individual situation and the environment they're in will often determine whether something progresses from the burnout down into the moral injury, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I can imagine, one example could be, I've been working in this system for 30 years, and I keep being asked to do more with less. And I'm now starting to feel like I'm compromising on patient care. And this is upsetting me to a point where it's, I'm starting to take it out on my family. I'm starting to get more irritable. I'm starting to yell at people at work. I'm starting to wonder, what is the point of me ever even being a physician in the first place? Does that sound like kind of a like stage 2 to 3 kind of moral injury?
That's heading into 3. And if that person doesn't get support of some kind, it could go into 4.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot about this when I talk about the stress distress impairment continuum of burnout, which is like, stress is the normal thing, right? Distress is when you're getting signals, your body is saying, hello, there's a problem, and you have a choice whether you attend to it or not. In moral injury, it sounds like you don't have the choice to attend to it or not. You're often like, okay, I guess I got to do this. And so you don't attend to it, and you don't attend to it, and your body's screaming, and your mind is screaming, and your soul is screaming. And then eventually is where the impairment happens, where you're not even noticing what's happened to you, but there's a really big problem. And then that's how they kind of end up at your door, where their life has changed to a point where they almost don't recognize themselves, or they've lost themselves in some way. Does that sound kind of accurate?
Yeah. And that's why, again, the reason for me to publish the book and to use the terminology is so that the first step of the healing is to start to understand what you're feeling. So most people feel bad inside, and they have no idea what it's called or what's happening to them. And the culture in healthcare in particular is very stoic, like you don't talk about it. Something's wrong. And everybody feels like something's wrong with them, and nobody else is going through this except for them. It's their fault. And the burnout conversation unfortunately reinforces that, I think, because it says, oh, you should take a vacation and do some yoga and you should be just fine. So the first healing step is actually having the right words to understand the emotions and the feelings that you have inside. And for some people, just that actually can kind of help them heal those stages of wounds. Even just knowing what it is sometimes provides a lot of relief.
Awesome. You just said the magic word. How do we heal? And we're reaching an ad break. So when we come back from the ad break, I would love to hear your thoughts about that healing process, what it looks like, what people can, do at different stages. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Jenny Byrne, author of Moral Injury, Healing the Healers. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can catch us on LinkedIn and YouTube while we're streaming right now, or otherwise catch us at talkradio.nyc later on and on podcasts. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Jenny Byrne. So we are nearing the sort of closing of our talk with a focus on now what? We've defined it, we've explored it, we've looked into kind of what it looks like at different stages. How can people heal from moral injury? What does it look like at different stages? What do you see?
So the good news is that, the work in the military has actually shown us some of the ways to heal from moral injury. So we actually do have kind of a guidebook of how to do that. As I mentioned before the break, the first thing is knowing what it is. So giving voice and normalizing the experience. And this is where I know you have a lot of leaders and managers listening on the call. This is where you really play an important role to create a space and a normalization of what people are feeling.
Mm.
And again, I think as a leader, I've done this myself. You want to fix the problem, and sometimes it's not fixing the problem. It's just giving voice to it and letting people share their experiences. Sometimes that's the first thing. So telling stories, I mentioned earlier, is what human beings do really well at. You can show statistics, that's helpful, but telling stories. And so part of what I did in the book was people told me these very vulnerable stories. And then I would get these emails later and they'd say, Jenny, I never told anybody that story. I can't believe I just told you that on the interview. And you know what? I felt so much better after I told you that story. So just the sharing. And so I challenged myself writing the book to share my stories that were really vulnerable, right? Like walk the walk. And I was like, I'm going to do it. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a vulnerable story. I'm going to put it in chapter 1. I'm going to put it at the beginning. And that way everyone is going to see my worst story. And that is extremely vulnerable. And I'm going to see if I feel better. And I can tell you, even still a little scary, I do feel better putting that in the world and sharing that. And people have told me after that, oh my God, you told that story. The same thing happened to me. I never knew that happened. So telling stories, and as a leader, it's hard to strike the balance of being vulnerable, I think, with your team and then still making them feel supported. So I know that's a big challenge. I'm sure you help people with that. So telling stories is very powerful. The next level is really more these environmental shifts. And so creating safe spaces is a big first step. And sometimes you can't. Some workplaces actually are kind of too toxic and you can't. So having another venue outside of your work where it is safe, whether that's with colleagues, friends, for physicians, people you went to med school with, a professional society, having a safe space is really important. And if you can't get it at your work, that's okay. Not every workplace is going to be safe. You might have to go, and there are people out there who are very happy to help you create those spaces. The other part is then at the leadership and the systems level, kind of reimagining the healthcare experience. And that's kind of what I do for my advisory work. And that's how do we challenge assumptions we have? And there's a lot of new tools coming around AI and technology, which I am personally quite excited about because they're already making a big improvement on the day-to-day experience of clinicians and patients. So we're at a moment in time where if we can challenge the assumptions and be smart about how we use trusted technology, I think we're actually at a pivot where things could get much better, much faster. But the whole point should be the human experience. So the tech is great only so much that it supports the human. We get carried away with the tech and just want everything to be tech. That doesn't actually solve the problem.
Yeah.
And then I would say the final, the highest level way to heal is kind of a more, more of the national platform or the thought leadership or folks. I mean, I hope that just even putting a book into the universe has impact. I don't know how many people it'll touch, but I know it's already touched some people, right? My clinical work, I know I can touch people that way. So finding meaning in the work and finding a way to have an impact. And I would say in terms of well, how do you do that? I think that, and you talked about the virtual workplace. I think small acts of kindness are extraordinarily underrated these days. And I don't know why. I have found that by showing up with a good energy and being kind and curious about other people, sometimes that is what's healing, just being kind. And so, what does that mean for a patient? Well, when you go to the doctor, one simple phrase any of us can use is if you tell your clinician, your doctor, your nurse, others, thank you for everything that you do. Takes a few seconds to say it, not thank you for what you did for me. That's different. Thank you for all that you do for the world. I guarantee you that will feel good. That will matter. It may not fix all their problems. If I had 5 people say that to me every day, that wound may, little tiny wounds, that may patch those up. Small acts of kindness, thank yous. The virtual workspace has different ways to be kind. We don't open doors for people because we're not in person, right? But again, I think it's underrated the energy that you bring to your work. And it's hard as a leader and a manager, like to show up consistently with a really good energy and also be vulnerable enough to say, hey guys, you don't have to worry about it. I'm just letting you know, I got some stuff going on at home today. If I'm not 100%, it's nothing that you're doing. I just wanted to let you know, or to tell if you're a manager, we have a one-to-one today. I just wanted to let you know, I got some stuff going on in the background. I may not be able to be 100% with you. Do you want to reschedule or would you rather keep it? It's totally up to you, but I just wanted to let you know. Stuff like that, like little phrases. It's hard. It's really hard to have this energy. And we were joking a little before the show about getting older and what it takes to kind of keep your mind and body healthy, on a daily basis. And it does, it takes a lot of intention. So I think there's like individual things we can do, and then there's like the bigger level things, but we can all be kind. We can all be kind. Like, it's really not that hard.
Yeah.
Whatever is going on in you, I guarantee when you're kind, like it does help. It does make you feel better too.
Absolutely. There's a couple of additional examples I'm thinking about as you're talking through this. One is when during COVID, I just remember this one situation where some guy was treating this nurse at the pharmacy just awful. Like it was something about like waiting for a long time, or I don't know what it was. And I came right after him and I could tell she was frustrated. And I just said, I'm so sorry that you went through that. And thank you for everything that you do. Right. Like that's all it took. I saw it and I named it. I didn't keep it to myself, which I could have. Right. I could have said, oh, what a shame, or, oh, that guy, or whatever. Right. But like name it, the other is, going back to where you started with all of this, which is like the sort of Ford assembly line, thing. We've taken it to its logical end when it comes to its application to everything and all things. Not everything must be a productivity model with hyper efficiency, bottom line profit. We're starting to move away and back into human-centered design. Like, we're the humans in all of this, right? And so that's a lot of what you're speaking to is extracting back the human in all of this. How do we bring them back? Because they're there, right?
I like to say humanism. And when I say humanism, I mean also your physiological embodied human self. And it's another topic for another day, but the birth rate is declining quite dramatically. And we have less people to be cheap labor across the world. I'm hopeful, again, I'm an optimist that we will start to see a reimagining of like, let's let the robot do the robot stuff. Let's let the humans do the good human stuff, right? Like, yes, the robots can do the dumb stuff.
That's right. That's right. Now, if people want to learn more, where can they find you? How can they find out more about your book and everything else that you do, your speaking and everything?
Yeah, best way to reach out to me is I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on other social. So LinkedIn, connect with me. I keep articles there. You have my website, which is my name, www.drjennybyrne.com. I try to kind of keep an archive of all the content there. The book is on Amazon, where all books are. There is an ebook. paperback and an audiobook. So if you like to learn through auditory, it's there. And I think the bottom line is, like, whether it's me or somebody else, there are people out here to help you. There are people who would love to help you. You are not alone. You know, we are here. You just have to take the step to reach out and start to get curious. And I promise you, there are people out here who want to help you. So you can reach out to me. I'll try to send you in the right direction. But you really, please know you are not alone, and there are people out here to help you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. What did you, audience, take away from this out of everything, all the golden nuggets that she shared? And more importantly, what's one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned? Is there a colleague out there you've been worried about? Are you in a position that you can make some changes based on what she shared? Is there something that you need help with that you can seek her help with, right? What is one thing that you can do this week to implement based on what you learned from Jenny? Share it with us or reach out. LinkedIn is where you find her, where you find me, and at talkradio.nyc. So we can, help you, support you, cheer you on. We're also located, the radio show is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, all over the place. So if today's episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague and or leave a review. And if you're looking for more personalized support specifically to leadership and team coaching, you could also head to towerscope.com to schedule a consultation. And you can also check out the Millennials Guide to Workplace Politics, or the workbook associated with it, as well as our Leadership Academy, a social impact leadership learning community. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Together, we will navigate this space right now and the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side. This is Dr. Mira Brancu signing off. And until next time, stay steady, stay present, keep building those hard skills, and reach out to Dr. Jenny Byrne if you need her support as well. Take care, everybody.